Excellent. My name is Michael. Hello. There are many of you. I hope I do not disappoint you.
I hope so too.
Yes. and you paid to come. So look, this is a talk about big data, and this is my big water. Thank you very much. Oh yeah. This is not a symbol of anything except the success of Oxford. So how many of you are students at Oxford? Okay, how many of you are working in big data or think that you are working in big data? Okay. How many of you got a copy of my book today? The rest of you are welcome to leave. I congratulate those of you who did get a book on your serendipitous intelligence. This is a 20-20 talk, and like all European things, it's very regulated. So they give you 20 minutes for talking and then 20 minutes. So it's extremely annoying in that way, and I refuse to accept the rules. So I will go as long as I fucking want to. And you can interrupt me as much as you want to. I also reserve the right to tell you not to interrupt me. But you can interrupt me and ask a thing. You do not have to be polite or very British or like apologetic. Just ask the thing you want to ask. Say the thing you want to say. I do not court controversy, nor am I afraid of controversy. The topic is big data. There is really one slide that I want you to pay attention to, which is not this slide, which does have a picture of me, which is fabulous. This is who I am. In fact, I am, I think, wearing exactly the same shirt as I'm not sure. I have more than one shirt, and then this is the American version of the book that I just signed. There's a British version, which is the same content but a different cover, and it's soft cover because apparently that's better for Britain for whatever reason. So I wrote the Reputation Economy. I'm the CEO and founder of Reputation.com, which is a big data, big science, big insight business. And the number one question I get from CEOs is, how do I turn big data into revenue and growth? Okay. So, which really means, as an antecedent matter, what the hell is big data and do I have any? And so the question I'm proposing to answer for you today is, as entrepreneurs, I'm going to assume that we are all entrepreneurs or people who are going to be executives or are executives, is do you have any big data and what can you do with it and what do you do about it? Right. So big data is just, well, it's very simply, right? There's not. Let me just take the mystery away. It's a lot of data. Wow, big data just paid for itself. Fertik can go home now. Big data is a lot of data, but really it becomes useful. My proposition that it's not big data, it's important data or big insight. Big data is useful when previously siloed data sets are connected, and it is astonishing and will remain astonishing if you work in big data. You already know this. How true it is that any institution of any size, including a small startup, accidentally silos its data into different buckets, and they do not get connected. And what happens is that what happens when a company or an institution is interested in using and unlocking the value of big data is they combine these data sets and interesting things happen. Now, they may not all exist within your walls. They may exist outside in the Ethernet. They may exist in the conglomerates with which you partner. But usually, number one, you are sloughing off and garbaging data that you have. And number two, the data you have and do retain does not get connected to other data sets. This is the one slide I want you to remember. So if you take a picture of a slide, take a picture of this one. OK, everybody comes and gets a picture. Great. So this is the only slide that counts today, as far as I'm concerned. It does not mean that you should stop paying attention after I move on from the slide. However, this is the money slide. Okay, so something has happened that is changing the world. I live in Silicon Valley, and we say that things change the world all the time, and usually that's just false. Silicon Valley has only one major flaw, which is that we have no sense of irony. We're like the Catholic Church. We have no sense of humor about ourselves. And so we say things that are plainly false, like, oh my God, the iPad and Angry Birds have changed the world again. That is false. But this is changing the world. I have no economic interest in the facticity of this slide except for the economic interest I have in my book, which is pretty small as a matter of the total. So here's my proposition to you. 3 technologies have been born or are being born right now that are changing the world forever. They are unlocking value that we did not understand would ever be unlocked. The first is free and infinitely powerful search. You can call it Google, okay? Google and its cousins, Google and its progeny. This is the power to find anything instantaneously. This is about 20 years old, basically, right? Number two is free and infinitely powerful storage. So right now, like right this minute, this year, this month, maybe next month, but right now, for the first time in human history, not in technical history, for the first time in human history, it is cheaper to store something forever than it is to delete it. I'm going to say that again. It is cheaper to store something forever than it is to delete it. That is a major change in the default setting of humanity. Okay? So all the stuff that we worry about, PRISM, all the stuff that we worry about, NSA, all the stuff that we worry about, privacy, right to be forgotten, comes from the fact that it's now easier to keep it forever than it is to delete it. Less friction to keep than to delete. Extremely big change. And that basically comes down to something we can call the cloud. And the logo I've put here is Amazon Web Services. I'm not especially worked up about Amazon. I'm just using a logo because sometimes it helps. Yes?
So I don't understand how possible that it's cheaper to store. Like obviously some electricity or whatever.
So the mechanism to delete, that's a fair question. I'm going to move past it quickly because it's a reasonably quick answer, which is the mechanism to delete, which is to find out what you want to delete and then to delete it, not to delete everything, but to delete that file about you, is actually more expensive than it is to store it now. That's the mechanism. And that's a function chiefly of the fact that server power, sort of server storage cost is extremely, extremely low. It's extremely low. It's basically free now. There's electricity and so forth. It's basically free. The third technology is Hadoop or I'm going to call it Hadoop or Mapreduce. Does anyone here know what Hadoop and Mapreduce is? How many of you think that you use Hadoop or Mapreduce? Okay, that's okay. The one huge dork in the front row. Yep. Anyone else? Yeah, that's a compliment where I live. Yep. Yep. Okay, so here's the fact. How many of you have used or do use regularly Microsoft Excel? Right, exactly. No. So look around. So that is 100% of you. In 10 years, 100% of you will be using Hadoop or MapReduce. So in fact, probably more of you right now are using technologies that are built on Hadoop or MapReduce than you think. Hadoop and MapReduce achieves one thing. It's very analogous to Microsoft Excel. These are technologies, or a pool of technologies we can describe, which make it possible for an educated but not specially skilled person to do data analysis. An educated but not specially skilled person can do numbers because of Microsoft Excel. The same thing is now true because of Hadoop and MapReduce with respect to analytics. Now, you may not use something called Hadoop. You may use a device that sits on top of the underlying technology called Hadoop, but you will be using these technologies imminently, even if you are not a data analyst. And this is the payoff of this slide. When everything is stored forever, and everything is findable immediately, and everybody in rooms like this can do data analysis, everything will have a score. The payoff is that everything in our lives will be scored. So big data in your business is going to come down to big insight. Big data in your medical life will come down to big insight. And you will be in the business, intentionally or accidentally, of both generating scores as a matter of commission and generating scores as a matter of existence. So people will be scoring you and evaluating you. I will walk out of this room. You'll have some set of scores that attach to my speakerness and my whatever else, and that will affect my prospects the next day. And you as well will have your own scores about being a neighbor or the guy who's watching me. So this is the big slide. This is the thing that is changing, that is making big data possible. People talk about big data. It's very frightening. But it really comes down to these three things. So big data, of course, is important. It's hyped. What is it? I'm not sure why I put that there. Do I have any? Yes, you do. And how do I use it to generate revenue and growth? So big data is more or less large data sets of almost any kind that get stitched together. Remember, de-siloing. You, your organization, your business that you have or you will start does have big data. You have to assume that you have big data. You don't wait to be the skies of a bank, right? You work in the big financial services sector. Of course they have big data. Yes, in the back.
It's not a kind of old thinking lenses, this kind of, you just gather data from
all over, and then you put them in a big pot, and then you mix them well, and then you find the use.
Sounds like cooking. This is how you make cookies. Is it old thinking? You accused me of old thinking. Thank you. Someone has challenged me already. Good.
Instead of, right now there are a couple of people that are arguing that instead of, this is a typical kind of analytics data company that just go gather whatever they can, and then they start looking into trends and stuff like that. And the other side, there are some other people that are saying, look, that's wrong. And the other way to do this is that you go there, you see what your client does, or what's the use of that, and based on that, you point and you pick the points of data that you want to collect, and you do it like that.
So this sounds sort of like a Jedi level question. It sounds like you work in this field. Here's what I would say. I think neither statement you're making is especially wrong or useful, which is to say that, thank you very much, thank you. She was not a plant, but thank you. Which is to say that, it's important, is to say that, look, I think you're thinking of a company like a consultancy, like a PwC or a Palantir, which may go and visit on site and say, you've got a lot of data, we're going to help you make sense of it. And then maybe, on the other hand, there's some other group that says, here's the one cell in your spreadsheet that really counts. I guess what I'm saying is that none of this stuff really matters until you can get to the therefore, until you can get to the insight and the analysis that matters. Let me see if I can unpack this a little further, because I think that on the one hand, on the one hand, I got to keep going. On the one hand, the discussion is a little bit more pedestrian. At the same time, I think it will be unpacked in a couple of slides. Just hold the thought. To your point, how do we get more data? So I maintain that you can get more much more easily than you may think, and almost certainly you and your organization are not getting maximum value from it. So here, this is a very practical slide here, which I've shown to a lot of CEOs and CTOs and CIOs. Is anyone here a CIO? Yes. Raise your hand. Anyone here a CTO? Does anyone here know the difference between a CTO and a CIO? So that's going to be another thing we're going to talk about, because this population should really know. I'm always alarmed at how few people outside of Silicon Valley know what a CTO versus a CIO is. And that's especially important for this discussion. So normally there are two buckets of data in an organization that you may have. The obvious ones are, and here this is a much more pedestrian answer than I think your very good question asked, is finance usually has some data, or you usually have some kind of organization usage of an ADP or a QuickBooks or an Intact. Sales, you might be using Salesforce. You're usually using some kind of set of tools like Google Analytics, some kind of marketing tools for your SEO or SEM. And then often you and your startup or your large company or organization will have surveys of some kind. They're very rarely integrated. There are a set of tools and companies that are attractive. One is Tableau. Have you heard of Tableau? I have no equity interest in Tableau. I'm just describing them as an example of companies that are trying to bring sort of dashboards together of data that allows you, for example, to do something very obvious. Pick your next best customer. The more tricky or sticky wicket, I think you say in the UK, I'm not really sure if that's offensive or not, but it's a sticky wicket. The stickier wicket is open data, unstructured data, open web data. Here's the problem. It's usually not treated as seriously as finance data. One of the most educated and talented people in your organization, whether you have it now or in the future, is you're going to be your CFO. This is one of the most respected people, one of the most educated, one of the most highly vetted people. And he, she, plus the controllers, and usually something called a BI or business intelligence team, which often works for finance, will look at all of the numbers, something called numbers that you have from your business, and say, this is what we understand to be true about our business and our custom and so forth. Then comes all the stuff on the open web, and you give it to like fucking Omnicom or some company like the PR agency, and there's a guy like named Jared, who's 28, who's like looking at all the internet, and he's like, this is what the internet says about you and about your company, and this is how you should understand. And it's just bonkers, right? So this is where a lot of companies just fall down. They do not understand that the open web, like if you are working in PR, you are completely unqualified to do data analysis, right? In 10 years, you will not be, because you will be disrupted by the guy who is, so you will learn data analysis so that you can actually survive in PR. But the problem is that the companies that are at the top of the heap are looking at sort of agency types, outside types, to find the data point or the trends that are important for them. Then never do these two buckets actually meet. The CEOs and startup entrepreneurs of today are afraid of the uncertainty and absence of clarity of these data points, and they are reliant on the CFO to explain the world on these data points. So they are not actually yet really taking the job of unpacking data seriously for themselves. So there are 4 steps to figuring out how to make big data, and I hope that this slide does not disappoint my chief friend in the peanut gallery. First, you acquire data. Second, you identify the data you haven't acquired more. You integrate the data, and then you analyze it. Fine. So here's a few use cases that I'm seeing, not just in my business, but in the world, of how big data are actually being deployed by businesses. I'm going to give you, I think, 4 US examples, just to give you a sense of what big data has been doing for some of these businesses. This one happens to be from my company, but I'll give you several that are not. So there's one of the largest market cap retail companies in the United States. It's a global business, a global brand. In fact, it's a European brand that sells in America with many, many, many stores. And through traditional offline surveys, they discovered that it's a store in San Diego, in case it matters. It was their #1 performing store based on sales and based on customer satisfaction. And then oddly, they couldn't understand why they also had a fairly high return rate at that store. But consistently for 5-6 years, they were discovering that this store was their #1 most valuable performing store consistently. What they did not do is integrate the online data around the unstructured data around their business. And as soon as they did that, as soon as they took that project seriously, they understood that they had a very, very high-pressure sales team, a very, very high-pressure commission team, and a special SWAT team inside that store that would go and call and knock on the doors of the customers and persuade them and cajole them to give them high customer satisfaction ratings. And they would use such techniques as, listen, if I don't get a 5-star record from you, I'm going to not make my mortgage. So what do you do as a customer? You say, shit, I don't want to do that. I'm going to give you a 5-star rating. And then you go return your product. So oddly, they had this very, very high customer satisfaction and a very high return rate. Turns out that if you looked at just the offline data, they were #1 in the country. If you looked at the other data that was unstructured, they were in the bottom decile. So people would go and say, I'll fill out your form, and then they'll tell the truth on Yelp. Okay? That's what they do. They go tell the truth on some other site. And this became very, very operationally alarming for the HQ because they understood that their internal mechanism run by the CFO was simply not up to scratch. Another retail example I'll give you, one of the big, sort of big box mart companies, it's probably reasonably clear that there are 3 or 4 that this could be in America. It's a global brand as well. They have figured out that, so every retailer wants to think of itself as selling high quality products at a great price with customers who love them. And over again, the marketing team and the communications team and the CFO came back with, respectively, our customers love us. They come back all the time because they love us. And the CFO said, and they pay, and everyone's happy. Turns out, through integration of a lot of available data, both offline and online, that they had sitting around, they were not able to discover just the one data point, but in actual fact, a huge trend, which is their customers do not like them. But they use them and rely on them because of 3 things. 1, the inventory is always on the shelf. And if you've ever been to one of these stores, I can't name it, it's like 200,000 square feet of inventory. It's impossible to think that the inventory is not there. Number 2, the price is always really low. Number 3, checkout times are really fast. Why is that important? Because nobody wants to be in store. So get me the hell out of here as quickly as possible with the stuff that I just found on your shelf. Okay? Now here's what's important. They had to reimagine their entire company based on this very key conclusion. People don't go there for good sandals. They go there for cheap sandals. And they had to reconcile themselves to the fact that their customers knew and understood that the sandals were going to fall apart after the summer. But it was better than getting an expensive set of sandals for this population of customer. And what they wanted was to go in, get the thing off the shelf, and leave. And so the whole business of having someone greeting you and making you feel comfortable, like a concierge service, no, nobody cared. They do not like your store. But they love the fact that they can get stuff quickly and get out of there. And by the way, people who shop at the store, up to 80% of them do not shop anywhere else. Your customer does not have to love you, is what these guys discovered. Now, the CMO really has a hard time accepting that, but it's true. And by the way, the CMO should not get fired. The CMO trucks people in by the busload and makes a crap ton of money doing this stuff. But the CMO somehow wants his or her ego is tied up in being liked, which is silly. Although you can take advantage of that if you have a CFO. Okay, so large cap health system. This is very, very interesting. The health systems in America are unlike health systems probably anywhere else, certainly in the UK. And it's very competitive in the US. And Obamacare, like it or not, I'm not asking you to have an opinion, is making it more competitive for hospital systems to need to get what they call lives, which means patients. And so we're in a competitive market for lives. And what's very, very interesting is that there's a very big disconnect between what patients, what customers of healthcare experience and what they actually know about their healthcare, right? So one thing that you will quickly see or often see if you study this is that guy walks in, he's got a broken knee, doctor fixes his knee, but he waited for 3 hours in the waiting room, so he's really, really pissed off. And the doctor says, well, I fixed your knee, right? And the guy says, well, I had a bad experience. So at scale, this can become very interesting and problematic. Now, you had a whole bunch of data that were flowing in this hospital system, and the hospital did not know what to make of it. And so in one example, the hospital system was being described by some number of its patients as being basically an infectious ward. Like if they were really behaving as badly as their patients thought they were in terms of cleaning up the hall and cleaning up the bathrooms, then they would be out of business. And of course, it's a very heavily regulated environment. And overall, the reputation of the doctors, of the hospitals, the discussion about the service and the quality of care was even food was very, very low. And somewhere in the middle, there was a theme that emerged that people thought the place was dirty. And of course, they were sanitizing this place all the time. So what they figured out was very, very simple change. Under all this pile of data, after months of analysis, they figured out that they were not putting up "we just cleaned it" signs in the hallways. And those yellow signs say, hey, we just cleaned it, watch out, slippery, sanitized, extremely clean, hygienic, don't worry about it. And they started putting up that sign twice a day, or 3 times a day, whatever it was, and the complaints went away. And now they got more lives. And the business went like this. Can you imagine? Can you imagine like how cheap that was to have like a 6% growth in your revenue? No, they did clean. They did clean. Thank you very much. Always got to be someone. But thank you very much. But they did clean. And so they just cleaned it. And sorry, it was up to 4%. 4%, not 6% rise. Very, very interesting one. So this is a very interesting one for this crowd because you're all entrepreneurs here. So let's say there's a luxury car brand in America. And again, the numbers will be pretty similar for the UK because they're actually, the behavior patterns are pretty similar. They know that a test drive is worth $2,000 to them. Because if you show up and say, I want to take a test drive, there's X and Y% chance that you're going to become a customer of theirs. So they know it's worth $2,000. Of course, it does not follow that you can go give everybody $2,000 to show up and do a test drive. That would be bonkers because you change the intentionality and the psychographic of the population that's showing up, right? However, it also does not follow, just as a matter of order of magnitude, that you can give everybody $20 because the person who is moved by $20 is not your customer if you're a luxury car maker. So it turns out that after a lot of understanding, analysis, and so forth, this company discovered, it came to the point of view, that the correct answer is that you can give graduates of X and Y number of colleges in America who are within 5 years of graduation $200 to show up and take a test drive. Why? Because you have a shot at getting them into your entry-level car, and car affinity, brand affinity for cars is still very, very, very strong. We don't know if it'll be strong for 50 years, next 50 years, but it's very, very strong. So if you get them into the C class or the 3 Series or whatever it is, the likelihood that that family becomes a BMW or a Lexus or Mercedes family is very, very high. So you can spend that amount of money, but you have to be discriminating based on where they went to school, what they majored in, possibly, but certainly these guys came to where they went to school, because that implies a certain level of lifetime income potential. Now, there are other ways you can cut the cake. How do you know someone's just moved out of town, now wants a car, right? But instead of letting them get into a VW, you want them to get into your Mercedes, for example. I'm not telling you which brand it is. So very, very interesting way to look at the data they had and come to very interesting conclusions by marrying it with data about income and data about professional development and lifetime earnings that is just now coming online because of data sets like LinkedIn, for example. So very, very powerful. Here's a third use case. This one is going to be the one that probably disturbs you the most. So, and if it doesn't, I'll give you another one. So hiring is all going to be done on scores. This is something that we all have to think about very much now. Hiring is going to be done on scores, and the future of hiring is not dominated by people. It's dominated by machines. Already, large-scale companies will be using machines to do scaled analysis of resumes. And they'll be looking for keywords like Oxford, and then you go to the top of the pile and so forth. They'll also be looking for more interesting things, like how quickly, as compared to the people in your cohort, did you ascend the ladder of promotion at a company of scale that's large enough for them to be able to understand. So if you're a 20-person company and you're becoming the VP, that may not mean anything. But if you're at a 2,000-person company and you become manager, senior manager, director, senior director, VP at a certain speed, how quickly did you accelerate as compared to your cohorts? You marry that with your first job, your college major, and we can have a pretty good picture of what your likelihood of success is. It's getting even more nuanced. So the guys who are doing this are doing very, very strong data analysis around cultural indicia. This is very tough, very fraught with disaster. Cultural indicia, here's a safe example, is going to be, this is someone we know who works very hard Monday through Friday and then plays very hard Saturday and Sunday. That's someone who's good for our culture. I'm making this up, right? We want that person to be with us. This is someone who's very quiet. This is someone who's very social. We want that person to be with us. So you have to understand, as an object of big data yourself, that you will be evaluated, like it or not, accurately or inaccurately on the basis of these kinds of indicia. And you have to prepare yourself as well to take advantage on the other side of the looking glass that is being built for you to deploy as an employer. And by the way, machines are really damn good. Here's what they're not good at. They are not good at the truth atomically about you or you. But they're good at the truth generally about this population or another population. And they're damn reliable. They're far more reliable machines as a matter of predictive success for who will succeed in almost any job than interviewing is. We already know that to be true. It's no longer controversial. Humans are not good at interviewing. They're not as good as machines. So what will happen in the future is, instead of sending your resume into a person, you will send a resume into a machine. The machine will surface, of the 10,000 resumes, it will surface 3 or 5 that the human should review. They will be great resumes that are very well suited to that candidacy. The human will interview those 5, and one of those 5 will get the job, and that'll be it. If you're not on the pile, you don't exist. Right? By the way, it's already college admissions is working like that in a lot of parts of the world because standardized scoring is so good that you can say, okay, look, you're either on the check me out with a human pile, or you're not. Okay, so a couple things, and I think we're done. This one's actually pretty useful for this crowd. I am just always, you guys need to know what the difference between a CTO and a CIO is. I mean, very few people do it outside. It's like in Silicon Valley, it is as obvious the difference between a CTO and a CIO as the differences between a lawyer and a doctor. I mean, it's just like that stark, right? You don't want a lawyer operating on your brain. So a CIO is typically someone, and there's a little bit of bleed over here outside the US, but basically it's someone who manages the machines, manages the infrastructure, who optimizes so that things do not fail, optimizes for runtime, with great exception to the superb people who are present. Typically a mentality of an empire builder, often ex-military or former military type of training, often accountancy training, very different kind of person. CTO, long hair, tends to have maybe a neck beard, a technology file, a technophile, someone who tends to be a little more radical, tends to not want employees, sometimes really doesn't want employees, which is a problem. Someone who is obsessed with technology will advance your interest in technology. That is the person you want being your head of data analytics. If you have the CIO in charge of data analysis at your company, you are already 3 steps behind. Now, there are certain companies, there are certain very progressive Global 2000s where the CIO is so enlightened that the CIO figures this out about him or herself, or is so good that he or she can be a CTO as well. In my career, I'm only 36, so it's not like a really long career, but this is what I do. I've only met one guy I thought was as good as being a CTO and as a CIO. Now, some companies need CIOs, hardcore, big gaming companies, big infrastructure companies, big banks. You need CIOs to keep the thing running. This is a mission-critical, big, important job. But that is not the job of a CTO. The best companies will have a CIO who reports to the CEO and a CTO who also reports to the CEO. If you do not know the difference for your own company between CIO and CTO, you must educate yourself. If you care about big data and want a shot at using data for yourself and your company, if you want to be plausible and credible in the field of big data, you have to know what a real CTO looks like. It is not a CIO. This person is typically less polished, less professional, has fewer employees, and is way smarter. Okay. Hire a data scientist or at least a data analyst. So, you know, too often you'll just see, how many of you know SQL? How many of you use SQL? That's good. That's good. So this is great. That's a great population for understanding what Hadoop will look like. You guys will be using Hadoop, you know, if you're not already using Hadoop in this population. You need the DNA inside your company. This is not something that can be outsourced. And then you also need a data warehouse. A data warehouse is one of the most expensive things that so it seems very, very expensive because it can be 1 or 2 years before it starts to pay off. A data warehouse is, I mean, even my company, I mean, I'm standing here lecturing you and telling you about all the truth of big data. My company, we probably just sort of throw away 50% of the data we get, which is appalling, right? So even for a company like mine, which exists in big data, we are constantly sloughing off data that we know that we want because we will extract value from it. And we have a data warehouse. We just haven't plugged in those data flows to our data warehouse. So it's something that requires a constant discipline. Now, by the way, a year and a half ago, we were keeping all the data, but we now got more data sets and are not flowing them into your data warehouse. Number 4 is probably the most important trick that a lot of people overlook, which is you need a data hygienist. You know the old phrase, garbage in, garbage out. It's very, 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 very important. And this is not a super expensive asset. This person typically is sort of $30,000 to $60,000 US, as opposed to a data scientist who might be $150,000 US. So the data hygienist tends to be someone who's very fastidious, who can come up with a data schema himself or herself, or can follow one, and just manually or programmatically goes through millions of rows of data to make sure it's clean. Because if you don't know what kinds of customers you have, or you don't know that these guys are actually, if you have a subscription business and you don't get payments from 3% of your customers in a given month, and you don't know why, or the fact of the failure of payment shows up in the customer service module, so that the customer service people call them up and say what's up, and it shows up in the payments module, so you're not misrepresenting how much money you're making, but it doesn't show up in the sales module, so you think these customers are still up for renewal, right? They're still live customers. There's an absence of data flow and accuracy across your 3 key pivotal functions, and the marketing people don't know who's a good customer, or who's sloughing off, or who's accidentally not paying, and the CFO may not know all these things. So the data hygienist is the one person or team who will build up institutional knowledge very inexpensively to make your data flow very, very well. Without this person, you can't do it. And then really, the most silly thing that I see is that people have outside agencies doing this, like PR agencies, digital agencies. It's just offensive when I see that happen. Yeah, it's like asking your digital agency to do brain surgery for you. It's just not good for you or your brain. There I am. Okay, good. Thanks. I'm ready for questions. And I think I have 10 minutes before I have to be somewhere else. So you guys can leave if you want, but I'm open for questions. Yeah.
Do you think it's probably already?
Who are you?
Sorry. Hi, I'm Julian. Do you think your approach is probably already outdated? Because effectively we're seeing already the rise of machine learning and making really sense of the data. Machines making sense in a way of data, while humans are, in a way, our brains can't cope with the vast amounts of data we're having now.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Machine learning is a phrase that covers all manner of sins. So it's depending on sort of your level of expertise, the answer is emphatically yes, right? So, but look, I mean, the companies that I think that actually do machine learning really well, I can probably count 5. So look, your proposition is that machines are going to be doing more and more of this, which gels precisely what I think. but certainly not mainstream yet. I mean, there's just no mainstreaming of this yet. I'm trying to prepare a broad general management audience for what I think is coming. If we were in a you know, a MongoDB UserCon, then I might have a different point of view. But even there, they'd probably say it's not mainstream, and their customers don't get it yet. But it's a fair question. Yeah.
Hi, Joel Lasher, MBA class. So when you talk about the problem or the emergence of scores for everything, this is going to include our personal score, and the current problem with the sorting and algorithms being able to identify us as a group very well, but not as individuals. Are you going to go past reputation into like proactive identity management? There's a lot of really cool companies moving in this direction. Is that like a solution that you think is going to get to the bottom of this and allow people to get to the top of the pile, so to speak, in the best way? Or what is the approach that people are going to need to kind of balance the tension between reactive reputation and proactive getting ahead of all these trends?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So that's a Reputation.com question. Reputation.com, most of this was not about Reputation.com. I was trying to offer some big data stuff, which hopefully came across. Yeah, we've got 2 million, probably it's public information consumers around the world, and most of them are being proactive. I definitely think that proactive is better than reactive in most things, including health. You know, doesn't mean we don't do the wrong thing and need reactive health. But yeah, for sure, I'm excited about that ecosystem. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lily.
Lily.
What are the potential pitfalls of crowdsourcing? Do you have some first-hand experience?
Potential pitfalls of crowdsourcing?
Yeah.
So crowdsourcing. How many of you are very crowdsourcing? You know, yeah, good. Okay. So crowdsourcing is look, the crowd is both wise and dumb, and there's no way around that. You know, the crowd is accurate over time. But most things digitally don't happen over time. So let's use an example of crowd financing. Okay, so how many of you have done some crowd financing investment of some kind, right? So it's kind of fun, right? And as you know, the UK is sort of ahead of the US in this because we're regulated. We're worried that people are going to lose their shirts. One thing you're seeing is that very easy to understand value propositions are getting a lot more traction than difficult technology and crowdsourced stuff. So that tells you something. It tells you that people are wise enough not to risk their money on something they think they don't understand, but they're also unwise enough to believe they do understand something that maybe is too simple. So, you know, I am a believer in the crowd, but if you want a more substantive answer, the crowd is really good over time, and it's not so good in short bursts, which we all know. That's not a new proposition. It's as old as the Greeks. That's just still true. Yeah, in the back. If you're a startup, I love that. Yes, if you're a startup. I have a friend who's a startup, yeah. Yeah. I know this guy. He's kind of like a nice guy, but he's got a girlfriend. Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah.
I guess the question is, if you are collecting user data, how important can that user data be in your sort of value proposition for exiting the company a few years down the line?
How valuable is user data for exiting the company? So is there enterprise value that you can generate from having a lot of data about your consumers? Yes, but you have to have a lot. Like a lot. And you have to have a lot that other people don't have. Yeah. And then the scale is now like 10 million plus, maybe 20 million plus, and then deep stack about those guys. I mean, in the United States, let's say, for a US venture-backed startup. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dan. I was wondering, how do you ensure companies don't maybe believe the models too much or fail to understand the boundary conditions? Because I mean, one of my career has been in finance.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And we built really complex models and believed them a bit too much.
Right. Yeah, this is the best question about this topic. You can't. You can't. But I do believe that this is an area where the market will cure over time. So the biggest mistake that people make when they think about the future is they think about the present tense with one variable changed, right? Usually more, right? But of course, we now know if we could hold static the amount of data that's collected today and project ourselves 20 years in the future, we would understand that our models would be much smarter today. But of course, the world doesn't work like that. There will be more streams of data in 20 years than we had imagined could be possible today. And so as our model recursively gets smarter about what used to happen, it will get recursively dumber about the things yet over the horizon. So, which by the way is a good thing. It's good if you're selling weapons in this arms race, right? So you should be an entrepreneur in this field. But no, I mean, you know, it's often people, Google is the best machine. A lot of people think that sort of what shows up in Google is the truth or the First Amendment or God. And like, it's Google's machine. It's probably the best machine that's been invented in the last 20 years, but it's been invented by guys like you can meet, and they are fallible as shit. And so, like, you know, all of our machines are fallible. So, but I think the market is going to do a good job of curing this, because the market will give rewards to the best. It does not mean that, however, atomically for you, you cannot afford to ignore this. You cannot afford to believe that by not just yourself, you know, if you are a passionate environmental engineer and the internet does not know that, you are losing out on opportunities. Because the machine will not understand you, will not take the time to understand you, but it will find you if you put your flag up. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm in telecoms. We collect a lot of data.
Yes,
a lot of
yeah.
We're only allowed to store it for a couple of years, but our friends in higher places can store things forever.
These higher places mean the government.
Yeah. They can, well, you know, GCHQS, they can store stuff for a very long period of time. The question was more about, you know, reputation of com, I believe, is you can, as a person, you can help manage your online reputation, and, you know, maybe correct things. But what about all these big data silos that exist within private enterprises that we can't get access to, and they're making decisions on our future, like, you know, the gentleman over there was saying about finance modeling. Credit scores, maybe of something that I've done, or they think I've done, but I haven't actually done it, or a mistake I've made, all these future things. How are we going to control that sort of data in the future?
Yeah, so let me unpack that a little bit. So decisions are being made about us all the time. They're being made increasingly by machine. And the machines are relying on what they think are accurate impressions of us based on data sets that they have access to. This creates a set of problems which are inherent with such behavior because, in fact, you may share a name with another guy from the town of Sheffield who actually behaves differently. And so, look, some of these things are problematic. We now know that if your friends are obese, you are a bad credit risk compared to people who have friends are thin. I know of the people who are working on the following proposition, which will be very offensive to some of you. They are studying kids' viewing behaviors of TV online, and they are making probably pretty accurate predictions about their scholastic achievement. One very overweight guy I know is aware that medical data are being collected by insurance companies to make predictions about lives. So he's very much in Silicon Valley. So he has one of these Fitbit type things that he puts on a paint mixer to pretend that he's jogging all the time. And if you look at him, it's obvious not only he's not jogging, he should not be jogging because he'd be dead. So what I'm worried about, let me answer your question with a hypothetical about where we don't want to go, and then we can end because it's time, which is if we do not succeed in answering that question well, then what will happen is we will have a scaled economy of disinformation. That the next guy who looks like me will be building tools for you to disinform the machine at scale. And we've seen it before. We've seen versions of that pre-internet in the response to Soviet surveillance and so forth and so on. And I think we're starting to see that also in China because of the resistance to the mechanism that's been evolved. I don't know if you guys saw this, but the Chinese government is not only doing this, they've announced with flourish that they're doing this. They're now giving citizenship scores to their population. And giving, this has been reported widely in the press. You can see my tweets about it. Press release from like the Ministry of Information, which is amazing, saying, if we cannot control behavior, we have to incentivize it. And by the way, it's basically what you can imagine Facebook or Google doing, but they're just talking about it very openly. And it's going to be easier to get a job and an apartment and so forth if you have a good score. Which in a way is a beautiful idea. I'm going to say that very, very, I hope this doesn't get taken out of context. But it's also very problematic. And it's almost the most Orwellian thing you can imagine they're doing, or anyone doing, and they're admitting it, which is amazing. So I'm rooting for veracity, because I think you've asked a question that I'll answer only with the hypothesis about where we'll go if we do not succeed in answering it. I do not want to see a scaled economy of disinformation. Thank you. I've used up my time. I'm sure Oxford will tell me to get out of this room very quick. So thanks very much.